This is Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. All right, friends, thank you for joining us for another episode of Lead Balloons podcast, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. Joel, tonight's podcast is featuring a really interesting person. Would you please tell everybody more about this?
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited, Trent. So when we first started considering about a year ago, like, hey, we should bring on some third voices, I always had in my mind, what if we could get Joshua Harris on our podcast? And if you guys don't know who Josh Harris is, it probably means you weren't an evangelical in the late 90s and early 2000s, because he was the poster child. He wrote a book that went viral called I Kissed Dating Goodbye. He wrote several other books. He became a pastor for a very long time, and then very publicly disavowed his book and announced that he and his wife, whom he had written a book about their dating life and all of this, that was very instrumental in a lot of people's lives that I remember in college, people reading Boy Meets Girl and all of that. And he and his wife separated, and he went on a journey that I really resonated with, as someone that was a pastor who went through a divorce. And I just thought it would be so interesting to hear his perspective and his experience. So that's what we're going to get here, guys. Trent and I interviewed Josh Harris. Here we go.
Enjoy. Good evening. We are here for another episode of Lead Balloons podcast, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. Joel and I are here tonight as usual, but we are joined this evening by Joshua Harris. And we will tell you more about him in a moment, but we're really excited to have him on. Joshua is most famous, I would say, for his book that came out in, I believe, 1997. You'll correct me on that if I'm wrong, Josh. But his very famous book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, which is really a bestseller and a cultural moment within Christianity, more specifically within evangelicalism, had a huge impact. And the ideas from that had a big impact on Joel and I. So we really are excited to talk with you, Josh, and give our listeners an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. Some of them will know you probably quite well, and some of them won't. But if we can start kind of in advance of things, if you would actually tell us about your company that you launched, you're as described as a boutique, a creative agency, Clear and Loud. If you'll tell us a little bit more about what that company is doing, what you guys are striving to do, and then kind of how your previous work in the religious world has influenced the work that you're doing today, kind of bringing those two halves together.
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking that. I first of all, just fun to get to hang out with both of you. So thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I was a writer and a pastor for a long time, and I won't get into all the details of at this point of leaving that, but it was a big deal for me to step away from that. And so I was asking this question: what do I do with the passion that I have, the gifts that I have? I love to communicate. I love to come alongside other people. And so my business, Clear and Loud, is a way for me to come alongside people that are trying to sort through the confusion of their message. Oftentimes that's businesses, but at other times it's just individuals who are trying to sort through things that have happened in their lives or changes that they're going through, and how that connects to the message they have to share. So it's a lot of coaching work, and then it's also like helping people create their websites and their platforms and get their message out there. So be clear first, and then you can be loud, then you can have an impact. So I try to help people with that inner clarity. And I mean, the overlap from my past work is that, as a pastor, I spent all these years trying to translate and interpret these ancient texts to a modern context, and also help people with their own sense of purpose and mission. And now I do that as a coach and as a marketing strategist.
That's excellent. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Josh. And just so our audience is clear, how do you identify when people ask you're a pastor, you no longer identify as a Christian. What do you say?
Oh boy. Somebody asked me that today, and they were Roman Catholic, and they said, "Well, what are you?" And I said, "I'm confused." um, so
Perfect.
yeah, I mean, I think I Christianity and the stories and the language and the rituals of Christianity are so deeply embedded in me. I feel like it's almost impossible to ever say that that's completely not a part of my life, because it shaped me and it continues to shape me. But I'm not immersed in that, those structures and all of the same beliefs the way that I used to be. So that's when I say I'm a little confused. I feel very open to the spiritual. I feel very drawn to so many aspects of the Christian faith. I see so much good that can come from it, but I don't believe in the same ways. So I'm on a journey. I'm still in process.
Appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I that wasn't in our script to ask, so sorry to put you on that spot there.
No, I love it. I love it.
So yeah, I obviously was a pastor for a while, and we've talked about that on our podcast previously. And there are parts of that job that I deeply miss. I don't miss all of it, but there are parts that I deeply miss. And I'm just wondering about you. Are there parts of the life of a pastor that you miss?
I do miss the kind of the act of preaching and the work involved in trying to communicate these big, world shifting ideas. And I miss the community that those beliefs create. It's so powerful, and it's so hard to duplicate, I think, outside of religious belief in that way. And then I think I also miss the when you get people on the same page. Of course, there can be so much division even in a local church, which we all understand. But there's so much commonality, and there's so much like, okay, we all believe this, we all feel this, we all know what we mean when we say certain things, and that kind of commonality and kind of instant bond of care and the ability to pray for others and help others and have that common language is a really beautiful thing that I miss.
Yeah, same here. Very similar. Miss preaching, miss the community. 100%.
I tell people, Josh, that the last church I attended regularly was about 10 years ago, and we were in kind of the Reformed tradition, but more of kind of on the high church side, the robes and wine and breaking bread and everything.
Yeah.
And I miss that, but in particular, I really miss like the corporate singing and recitation of the creeds. There was something very beautiful about that, and I haven't really attended more than a handful of church services since then. And I think that I'm always asking myself, like, should there be a replacement for that, or what is the replacement? But all that to say, I do feel that lack in my life. Yeah. So but then there are other things, I'm sure, as you would say too, that you don't miss at all.
Notice I didn't put elders meetings on the list of things I miss.
100%. Yeah.
Well,
angry emails.
Oh gosh, yeah. I think that I've kind of gone through so many different phases along the way, and initially there was a lot of anger, kind of like, oh, how did this, the system screwed me over, or particular people used me, all those kinds of feelings. And then, just seeing the hypocrisy, just seeing the misuse of power and so on. And then as you live a little bit more life, you realize, oh, this is happening in every context. Humans get together, whenever you get, wherever two or more are gathered, people are going to be screwing each other over.
Yeah.
So
Hezekiah 2:17.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's in there. I know it's in the scriptures. But then I think, it's kind of a new place to be. And it's not a statement about, particular beliefs or whether any particular truth claim is valid or whatever. To be able to say, I appreciate things about this community. I appreciate things about this tradition, or there's beauty in it, and so on.
Right.
And that kind of allows me. I mean, I just even appreciate the three of us being able to say these things, where it's not like, I don't care if someone's like, oh, aha, see, you know, the Spirit's calling you back, or you're wrong, or whatever. You know, it's like they can say whatever they want. I can acknowledge there are beautiful things about the faith communities that I was a part of. I miss different aspects of that. And I can be happy for others that are, you know, participating in that. So that's kind of a new stage, I think, for me to be at.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Josh, in 2018, you did a big thing, and you released a statement, kind of apologizing and just explaining more about some of the negative impacts of your book, your super influential book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And then you recently re-released an updated statement on Instagram. Could you tell our listeners about the heart of the statement and why you felt like it needed to be updated and re-released?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I did repost that just on Instagram recently, and there wasn't so much that was updated about it. It was more a reality that I would have people, you know, ask me questions about the book, and they're not taking the time to go to my website and read the statement. So I just put it on Instagram. Yeah. So people were like, "Oh, it's updated," but it's just on Instagram.
Okay, got it.
But the reality is that there was a lot that led up to that. That 2018 statement, which included the decision to unpublish the book. So for me, there, you know, I'd written this book in 97. It was, you know, a huge part of my identity. It was a massive success in terms of, you know, as an author, as someone who was wanting to do something big for Jesus. This book took on a life of its own. You know, it was read by tons of people. A lot of people loved it, were grateful for it. And as years went by, a lot of people really struggled with it and said, "Hey, this is ridiculous," or "I tried to follow these things and these ideas really harmed me and hurt me." Well, it took me a long time to come to a place, you know, almost, you know, 20 plus years of being able to start listening to those critical voices. And it took me experiencing failure as a pastor, and you know, my church facing problems and stepping away from ministry to go to seminary and study, to be at this place and this headspace where I was like, I'm willing to interact with people who have different perspectives. They're not just, you know, not godly. They're not just people who are not committed to holiness. You know, they're fellow students, they're friends, you know, and I am kind of embarked on this journey of sitting down with those people, listening to those people, processing the content of the book, and kind of studying it from this perspective of, why did I believe what I believed when I wrote this? How does this line up with Scripture? What were the, you know, sociological things that were shaping this? All those kinds of things. And, you know, that moment in 2018 where I apologized for the book was this moment of me saying, you know what, on balance, when I look at the contents of this book and the way in which it communicated these ideas, even if it helped some people, I can't stand by it any longer. I think it's caused a lot of harm. I think it's caused harm in my own life. These ideas aren't, you know, rooted in Scripture. They go way beyond Scripture. And I need to pull it from publication and say that I disavow it. So it was a huge moment. It was a scary moment, and it took a lot to get me there. It wasn't like this just noble moment of, oh, I think I disagree with this, I'm going to unpublish this book. It was a deep struggle and a real turmoil that I went through in that process.
I'm just thinking, Josh, as I'm hearing you talk, you seem like someone who takes personal responsibility, very seriously. Is that accurate?
I mean, I aspire to be that type of person. I do think that for me, I've always wanted to, you know, have my life be reflected what's out there publicly. You know what I mean? And so if I was coming to this place of going, I have questions about this, or I don't, want to put this into the hands of my own kids, then I need to pull it out of, the world as much as I can and get the word out that I no longer believe that. So I think that was something that was shaped in me growing up. I just hated that. I hated that idea of like, you're up here with this public persona, but then behind the scenes, you don't really believe any of those things. Like when I wrote the book, I believed it 100%. When I was a pastor, I believed it 100%. And that's why, as I've gone through different changes, I have been more public about it because I want to be real, even if that means saying I no longer am sure, I'm no longer certain, or I don't believe in the same ways.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that, Josh. Yeah, go ahead.
If I can follow up briefly on that, I think that is what you did is just such a rare thing to do, particularly this was on a book that sold 10 copies. I mean, this is a very popular book, and to pull it from publication, that is fascinating, and that is brave. And because I didn't do anything on that scale, but I do know it was a big deal for me to leave the church and tell friends and family that I was not a Christian anymore. Wow. But one of the things that irked me, not that I wanted people to join me and do what I was doing, but what irked me was I had studied in seminary and learned a lot of things that I knew other pastors were learning that they weren't sharing with their congregations, or that weren't having an impact on the way that they viewed the Bible. And I was sort of like, did you guys learn the stuff that I learned about the creation stories and then ancient Near East and the flood accounts? Like, did you learn that too? Because I know you did, but this unwillingness to sort of depart from that, because you get so deep into, if you are a pastor, you have a full-time job and you're supporting a wife and kids in a lot of instances. You have a lot of good reasons for not departing from that stuff. You stand to lose a lot. So I just think that's so interesting that you decided to do that. And for you, it does seem like authenticity is such a core value that if you would have kept on sort of standing behind that book when you really didn't, it probably would have eaten you from the inside, I imagine.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I can be a hypocrite with the best of them. I can go along with the crowd with the best of them.
Yeah, with you.
But so thank you for those words. But I do think it would have. I do think it would have eaten away at me. And I think, Trent, you bring something up that I think is so interesting that I've thought about a lot, and that is when you're in the church, there's such an emphasis on sacrificing to follow Christ, leaving everything behind to follow Jesus. And some people do that. No question. There are people who really do sacrifice. They lose title, they lose respect, whatever. I think of other parts of the world where your life is literally threatened if you become a Christian. Like, I have total respect for that kind of faith. But, in America, in the West, like, we like to I say we like to emphasize this sense of like identifying with the martyrs and all the ways that you're, belittled for Jesus and so on. But the reality is that for a lot of people, especially anybody whose salary is tied to Christianity, and when I say that, I'm talking about churches, I'm talking about any Christian organization, even just, certain parts of the world, you need to be a Christian to do business, right? We don't talk honestly about the fact that actually there would be a huge cost for you to question. There'd be a huge cost for you to step away from faith. There'd be a huge cost, as you put it, to maybe teach a different interpretation of Genesis, whatever it might be. And and I'm not saying that's not true in a lot of different settings besides Christianity, but I just think it's like an honesty check. It's like a gut check to say, let's be real, guys.
Yeah.
There are a lot of motivations that have nothing to do with faith and conviction. They have to do with, our livelihoods, our salaries, our respect, the kind of respect we have in the community that we're in. And that's something I think I see now, having stepped away from it, that there's so much pressure to not question, to not ask, to not go against the status quo, because implicitly that you will lose a lot.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely resonate with that, Josh. What I find so fascinating about the book you wrote and kind of your journey is that it went into, like, one of the things that I deeply critique about kind of my upbringing. I was 100% into it when I was a teenager, when I was a youth pastor for 3 years, 100% into it. But it's often called purity culture.
Right.
And so your book didn't create purity culture, but it did somehow catch an algorithm, somehow happening in our culture, and it just like went viral, so to speak, to use that metaphor. And I was a senior in high school, I think, when your book came out. I had my first girlfriend. She's the first girl I kissed. I was also just like wallowing in shame several times a week for masturbating. I was just like in this like weird like vortex of what it means to be a Christian teenager. And this book was so popular. There were other books like Elizabeth Elliot's Passion for Purity that was often talked about very regularly in circles. And I remember feeling a little hesitant about the teachings. It just felt a little extreme to me. But I also felt like all of that was an alignment with in the holiness perspectives that they came from. I come from a Pentecostal background, which is very aligned with holiness traditions.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if you could say, can you tell us what you originally hoped your book would do? And if you can get a little more specific, maybe an anecdote, like what kind of problems did you begin to see with its impact?
Yeah. Well, I was reading Passion and Purity. My parents gave me that book when I was in high school. I didn't like it. I kind of like didn't really read it and rejected it. At the same time, in my youth group, the Southern Baptist Convention had a huge influence into churches. The True Love Waits a movement was taking place. So huge emphasis of teaching in my church, saving sex for marriage, honoring your future spouse. And then I'm getting this message from my parents, being fully devoted to God is giving, putting your love life on the altar, putting the romantic relationships on the altar before the Lord. And then this emphasis on godly relationships in courtship, which was a big emphasis in the homeschooling movement, which I was a part of. So all of that swirling around. I have a girlfriend. We're messing around behind closed doors. Didn't have sex, but we're trying to do everything short of that. And then when we broke up, I just had so much conviction and guilt about the way I'd harmed her. And I started, I went back and read Passion and Purity with kind of a soft heart. And so I basically adopted all of these ideas, ideas that were just, there was a huge mix of voices that were all saying, about talking about the dangers of sex, the dangers, the harm that comes from this, the emotional and spiritual harm that takes place. And so I Kissed Dating Goodbye was kind of this popularization of a lot of those ideas from a young man who was trying to rally, my peers, because I didn't want to do it myself. I was like, come on, guys, we should all do this. Like we should, if we want to be really
invite
serious.
him to the party.
Yeah, exactly. But it was, logically based on all of the, what I would now say very flawed ideas of that were stirring around there. Logically, it flowed that if saving sex was such a massive priority, and if this was a huge part of your being right before God and being holy, then dating was putting you in context that made you want to, get close to the line and have sex and, so on. And so I kind of just took it to the logical conclusion, and took it much further than scripture, don't kiss before you're married, all these different ideas that I just was picking up from all these different contexts and motivated by this youthful zeal. Well, that hit, and like your analogy of the algorithm and the going viral is really accurate. It just was like the perfectly kind of packaged message for what pastors wanted for their youth groups, what parents wanted for their kids. And it was a young guy saying, "Hey, I'm doing this. What your parents are saying is actually good."
Yeah.
And it just caught on. And I would say in any generation, dating is frustrating.
Yeah.
Dating it can be stupid. I mean, I've got a lot of single friends. They're saying the same thing. They're like, they're in like the apps world and all the ridiculousness happening there. But, dating can involve people using each other,
Yep.
people being super discouraged. And so if you have any kind of sense of, I want to honor others, I want to treat them well, and so on, dating can be a pretty brutal, playing field out there. And so the idea of we should just get rid of this and we should do things differently and that's going to work out in these ways sounded really appealing. But the effect of it over time, and this is, I think, the thing that's interesting, is a lot of the pop kind of Christian pop culture ideas that get thrown out there. They have their little wave, something's popular, everyone is excited about it. There's a conference, whatever. But to actually wait and see, like, what's the actual result of that? As that's played out 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, the impact is, there are often unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And so people who got married quickly because they were so concerned about having sex before marriage, or they didn't date people, they just married the first person they got into a relationship with, or people who were like so trying to apply these truths and they were so, worried about masturbating or worried about making out with someone or whatever, they're shutting their sex drive down, and then they get married and it's not so easy to flip the switch, or there's not the chemistry or whatever. And there are millions of different variations of these stories.
Yeah.
And positive ones too.
Sure.
I have to acknowledge that there are people that follow my book and they write me and are like, "I'm so sad you apologize for this because I have a great marriage." So but the point is, you're talking millions of people affected by these ideas. And of course, 20 years after, you've made decisions in your early 20s, you're going to be looking back and a lot of people are going to be like, "I do that different."
Yeah.
And so, people who are looking back with real regret, because the decisions that you make based on your views of sexuality and relationships and so on, they have such massive consequences. You get those things wrong. And especially if you look back and you feel like somebody made me do this, or somebody convinced me, or somebody handed me a book, and because of that, I made decisions that I'm still dealing with 20 years later. That's painful stuff.
Yeah.
You said something that really resonated with the way that I experienced Christianity when I was younger too, and that is you talked about how these ideas sort of made logical sense, that we're trying to avoid impurity, we want to have sex within the confines of marriage, and so what's the best way to do that? Well, it's not dating. It should be an environment where we have parental supervision and a real purpose and all that kind of stuff. And like, Joel could attest to this, and that's just the way that my mind works. Like, I was this hardcore Calvinist. I'm just like, well, if you look at Romans chapter this and you combine that with this,
oh my God,
and
stop
it's
it.
just the syllogism and it works and everything. But the problem is, like, as a 20-some-year-old Christian, you can do the logic, but a lot of these assumptions are really unexamined, and you don't have enough life experience to sort of like problematize them. And I think one of the things that began to bother me about the way that we talked about sexuality in the church was, we would just agree that shouldn't have sex outside of marriage. You shouldn't there should be no adultery, all these kinds of things. And the reasons for that is because God said so. But that sort of straight up prohibition precludes having the mature and nuanced adult conversation in which you can say, what are the wonderful things about sex? What are the dangers of sex? You might even say honest things like, hey, I knew some people in high school who were promiscuous, whatever, and they actually turned out okay. And it might be the case that there was some hurt, I'm sure, going on, but they might have had a really great time. And and it was just they just had fun. It was like, we don't want to say those things because that would be like the adult nuanced conversation. So I reach back to those days, and I see myself in a similar place where you have these different assumptions and they all work together to form this clear picture of things, and then as you grow and you have life experiences, you're like, God, that's not how it works out at all.
So true. Yeah. Well, it's funny because it is like nuance, but then I also think it's a huge issue is the issue of control. In other words, you don't talk about all the different options because you only want people to take one path.
Yeah.
You're so like, for whatever reason, maybe it's because you're making abortion the political issue, or you're just trying to beat the other side, or you're so afraid that, someone would be gay that, whatever the list is, whatever the fear is, there's someone in a position of power, whether it's a parent or a pastor, and they're basically saying, me helping you do what's right is more important than your freedom to make decisions, maybe even make mistakes.
Yep.
And when that becomes the most important thing, well, then you're going to cut corners. You're not going to be, you're going to teach this, teach things from the Bible in a way that doesn't really give the full picture of all that God's word says. You're only going to feature the testimonies of people that stand up and say, I had sex before marriage and it's damaged me. No evangelical pastor is going to have a testimony of guys like, yeah, I had sex with 3 girls in high school. It was amazing.
Great.
Like, yeah, I just wanted to share that. Like, you can't open those doors, because then everyone would, they might feel like it's okay, or whatever. So I think it's that control that is such a huge part of it, that then it just leads to dishonest teaching and oh man.
Yeah, I hear that 100%.
Josh, I wonder if maybe this is moving in a slightly different direction, but in line with what we've been talking about. But you had the big moment with sending that message out and really opening up conversation, having lots of conversations with people, and then opening up conversation to the wider public about your book. But I understand, and you can elaborate more on this if you want to, but I understand in fairly recent years that you have not just stopped pastoring, but you're not really part of the church anymore. Right. What was that transition like? Was it liberating? Was it full fraught with challenges? And how was it? How would you say? I mean, you can only experience it the way that you did, but as somebody who was a huge figure in that world in certain times, how do you think that impacted the experience that you had of leaving the church compared to myself, I'm known by my mom and sister, and I have a few friends. That's about maybe as far as it goes. But you're well known, so maybe you could say more about that experience.
Yeah, I think that it was kind of the dominoes falling of my different sources of identity. Stepping away from being a pastor was huge. Making the decision not to go back to pastoring, like realizing I didn't want to do that anymore, was a huge decision. And then everything that we just talked about with I Kiss Dating Goodbye, like it was this big part of my identity. It was my kind of, sense of self-worth. Like, I'm a best-selling author, that kind of a thing. And so to get to this point where I was able to be honest with myself and say, I don't think this book is right, and I need to unpublish it, just kind of opened the floodgates of honesty in a lot of different ways. Part of that, what happened not long after that, is my wife and I separated. A lot of the ideas that I put out into the world in my book, I followed all of them. I was the poster boy for those ideas. And I think I built a faulty foundation because of that. And so our marriage coming to an end, and that being something that was public, led to, it was a chaotic moment. I don't recommend that other people follow this, this approach by any means. Like, I don't want anyone to think like, oh yeah, the real heroic, noble, honest thing is to broadcast all these things and do all these things. I had been through a situation in my church where we were like one of the first WikiLeaks, in the church world, where people were just publishing and posting all kinds of private information. I just had the kind of mindset of like, I'm getting a divorce. Of course, this is going to be public. I'm going to, my ex-wife and I went out and posted it on Instagram. This is happening. We wanted to be in control of sharing that information. And the reaction was just this, shitstorm, this overwhelming reaction of, Josh Harris, his ex-wife, or blah, 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 all those kinds of things. And in the midst of that, she started being blamed by people like, oh, it must be because of, she's the problem because she was, using the hashtag Exvangelical in some of her posts and all these kinds of things. And I think it was almost, I felt like I was watching my whole like life burn down, which was sort of this weird moment where I just was like, well, screw it. Like, I don't know that I was in the healthiest, but I definitely was not in the healthiest place. I was kind of it was this weird moment where I was like, well, hell, like that's not the case. And so I did a post where I'm like, hey, just so that everybody knows, I don't believe this in the same way, and I think for me, it was this moment of, first of all, I don't want anyone pointing or blaming anyone for the end of this marriage. And then second of all, I'm not here trying to defend what I'm doing from some Christian perspective to say, oh yeah, here's why this and that. And I just was basically saying, guys, I'm out of here. Like, I don't want any more of the arguments. I don't want any theological debates. I don't believe the same way anymore. Like, kind of peace out, like leave me alone. And in that same breath, I was like, and I'm sorry for all my LGBTQ friends for the stuff that I taught and how that affected you, which is a great way to get Christians off your back because they just all thought I was gay. And so then they're like, oh, leave them alone. So,
oh my God, that's the
again,
best.
It was probably a bit over the top, but I was in this insane moment in my life where I just was like, I don't care. And I don't want people thinking, oh, Josh is this great Christian kid and, bad things happen. I'm like, no, I'm not at the same place anymore. And I've been dealing with the fallout of that and I think coming into more balance over the years. But for me, that was this massive moment of, I want, again, who I am and my public persona to be lined up. I want to be authentic.
Yeah.
And so that's how it played out in my life, which is pretty nuts.
Wow.
Thanks for sharing that. I didn't know some of those details, Josh. I've heard you speak in a couple of interviews, so thank you for sharing some of that. That's pretty amazing. I was thinking, I went through a similar experience when my ex-wife and I were co-pastors. It was obviously we weren't in like a spotlight like yours, but we had a lot of like mega churches coming down and visiting our church, and we were kind of on the radar.
That's
a lot of
deal.
people saying like, oh, they're doing something innovative. And so when we got divorced, there was obviously our community had deep feelings about it. People just didn't know how to not take sides.
Yeah, of course.
And it was so hard. The line I feel like I said multiple times to people because I was also not in the best place either, and I felt a little snarky. I was like, I learned when I was 9 years old that there was two sides to a story. How old do you think you'll be when you learn that? And so, I said that multiple times to people. I was so mad, and but I remember sitting down with someone who was because one of the things that we did in our church was we did transition to being fully inclusive or LGBTQ. I was so like grateful. We were in a very special faith community with that. I was able, like, the community evolved with my theology, which was so amazing.
That's
and
incredible.
It was what a gift. But I was sitting down with a woman who was LGBTQ after the divorce, and she was just asking me, how you doing? And I just felt compelled to tell her, listen, you're going to hear some things about me. They may, some of them may be true. I just want you to know I didn't cheat on my wife. And she was like, thanks for telling me, Joel. Even if you did, I'd still love you. It's okay. And I began to realize, there were a lot of people that just didn't know how to handle the person they put on the pedestal, right? They didn't know how to handle it when that person was revealed as a human. And so I'm just curious about you. Like, you've talked about, you did this documentary, I Survived, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Trent and I both watched your TED Talk that came out where you talked about strong enough to be wrong, which I thought was really beautiful. And you talked about the caterpillar just being like, caterpillar soup in the middle of that, right? And I went through that. I remember just being so disoriented when my whole resume that I've given my whole life to was now like meaningless. For my
Yes, that's
career is what
right.
it felt like.
Yeah.
And so I've gone through a lot of evolutions in my own theology. Can you tell us about your evolution and why you believe it's important to admit when you're wrong?
Yeah, the thing I think that I've learned through this process is our culture, the church is like this, but the broader culture is like this. We equate being wrong or admitting that we're wrong with weakness. And so it's just like avoid that at all costs. And the sad thing about that is it really just incentivizes people to become more and more radical, more and more ugly in their, expression of their convictions, even if deep inside they don't believe it. That's the thing that I just think is so sad. I mean, I see this like politically. I feel like it's probably often true of a lot of pastors that are out there or leaders that are out there. It's like, well, I'm going to keep saying this, and I'm going to even maybe keep saying it stronger, even if I don't fully believe it, because I have no future if I step away from these ideas. And the problem is that we have this, like, if anyone says they're wrong, well, we have to punish them for being wrong. And it's viewed as weakness, which means nobody can grow.
Yep.
Nobody can change. And really there's then no hope for any, transformation anywhere in the world, we all just it just has to be war until we're all dead, essentially, or one side wipes the other side out. There's no ability for people to go, hey, I've grown in this way. I see parts of what you're saying that are true. And now we have, common ground. So again, my experience is quite stark in different ways, but I've I've realized the importance of that ongoing process to be able to evaluate, to be able to not just get entrenched in ideas because of the tribe that you're in. And I've had to keep doing that. Like when I first came out of the church, I think as a lot of people, you swing, the pendulum swings hard in one direction, and you're like, oh, I'm free. I'm outside of, these cultic, this cult practice world or whatever. And then you just find yourself in a new cult. You're like, oh shit. I'm in a different place that has its own dogma, its own list of things you have to believe. If you don't say the right words, you're going to be rejected. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm with all these progressives and they're just like the church people, but in a different direction, And so all that to say, like, I'm still learning. It's not like I was wrong then and now I have it all figured out. It's like, okay, I gotta keep embracing that willingness to evaluate. I think it involves listening to people who I don't, maybe even like, trying to learn and find common ground and grow. And that's hard.
Thanks for sharing that. And I just want to add a question here. So I think about this all the time, how 20-year-old Joel, who was, studying Greek in his undergrad, leading worship in his youth group, even like 25-year-old Joel, who was, in seminary, really just intoxicated by all these new ideas and just what academia like gives us the permission to just kind of explore, which I really took a hold of. But even that version of Joel would be would have strong emotions and strong opinions about 46-year-old Joel today. And just like disappointed, judgmental, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you would say 20-year-old Josh would view you today.
Yeah. I mean, it's a two-way street. I have strong opinions about 20-year-old Josh. So we would, but you know what? I'm stronger than that asshole. I can kick his butt. So
Amen, brother.
No, but I mean, I think that the short answer is I would be appalled. I would be, judgmental. I would definitely be praying for, 50-year-old Josh really, really hard. But I'm learning to look back on that version of myself and say, of course you're going to think that way, because that's the only way you feel safe.
Yeah.
of course you're going to have that kind of reaction, because everything that you're learning is saying it's all black and white. There's only one way to do things. And, what comes with, age and gray hair and a bald head is a lot of life experience to say, boy, wisdom in real life is a lot more nuanced and gray than the 20-year-old idealistic person wants things to be. And so I'm okay with that version of me judging the hell out of me, and my job is to, I think, learn compassion towards that version of me, because I was quite angry. I mean, I joke about kicking my own butt, but the truth is that if I could interact with that version of myself, I just want to show compassion.
Yeah.
Because if I don't do that, if I can't have that self-compassion towards myself, I'm just going to be an arrogant asshole to other people who are living that same thing. Like, I interact with those people all the time that are just like I was back then. And if I, am judgmental and angry and self-righteous, I'm not going to help them at all. And so if I can meet them at this place of, what's shaping the decisions you're making? What are the longings for safety and security and certainty? And I can relate to that. I miss that. Yeah, that's a high. That's a great drug, that certainty.
Yeah.
But those people are also going to need, old heads like me to be there for them when some of that stuff starts to crumble.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, you've been so good to share so much great stuff with us and give us so much insight into what your life has been like, in your 20s, writing that book, and then later on seeing the downstream effects and your own life, and other people coming to you and sharing their positive and negative experiences. And so this has been really wonderful to hear your story, and
Thank you.
hope they're takeaways for me too. Like, one of the main takeaways, I'll just say this real quickly and move on from it, but I think one of the great cultural opportunities for growth in our culture is what you said, is admitting you're wrong as a sign of strength and not of weakness. I mean, if we could grasp that as a culture, I just think so many good things would happen. So that's such a fantastic thing. I know that's something you said in your TED Talk as well, as far as admitting that you're wrong. But so we've traveled down memory lane, but I'd like for me and Joel to hear from you, as well as the listeners. Like, what are you doing now that you're excited about, and in the days ahead? Like, what gets you up in the morning and gets you excited about the things that Josh Harris gets to do now?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking that. Well, last year, I got remarried. So,
congrats.
Thank you.
Congrats. I didn't know. I was going to ask, but I didn't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I married an incredible lady. Her name is Kelly Lamb. And, I just, am experiencing so much joy in that relationship. Partnering with her in life is incredible. So that's a huge part of, what, fills my life with a lot of meaning and purpose. And I feel like I'm at this place now where I'm really wanting to just be a part of meaningful work, and for me, that is trying to come alongside people who are wrestling with the fallout of change. So the coaching work that I mentioned earlier is really important to me. There are just a lot of people that, they start to shift in one way or another, and they just feel like everything's going to fall apart, or everything has fallen apart. And I can relate to, people facing that kind of story. And so to be able to just talk with them and listen and help them chart a path forward is really exciting for me. I'm trying to get back into writing again. I have this crazy goal to write a book to replace all the 6 that I unpublished. So whether or not I hit that goal, I'd like to just write about the human condition, write about what it means to be looking for meaning and purpose, and sharing my own journey. So those are a few of the things.
That's beautiful. Wow. Josh. Thank you for sharing that. I also got remarried about a year and a half ago.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, my wife's name is Poonam. She grew up Hindu, and I always say that we were born in different soils, but we've been grown towards the same sun.
Oh,
And
that's
so,
awesome.
and
Congratulations.
thanks, man. Yeah, and we just started we have a couple people over once a month just to kind of, we both miss the spiritual community. So we're just trying to
Yeah.
like cultivate that with like minds. She's a psychologist. So I call our groups like, we're to do like psycho spirituality, and we just really delve into
That's awesome.
how to just like, hey, what's
How do
our
Kelly and
brain
I
do?
get on that invite list?
Come
Can
on
we get
over,
on
man.
this?
Come to
Yeah.
Dallas, bro. Come on, man.
That's great. We'd love to. We'd love to.
So I just want to kind of ask you a final question. Your journey to me was so interesting to me because I was, probably because I had my own like reckless ambitions as an arrogant 20-year-old, just wanting to just climb that ladder. I
Yeah.
saw the conference speakers at all the church conferences, and I wanted to be the one on the stage. I wanted to be writing the books. And I was really pursuing that in some ways. And it's really almost refreshing to like be talking to someone who jumped off that bandwagon, because I left that bandwagon as well, but I didn't experience any of the success you did. But I'm just curious. I've been trying to create a new path for myself, and I feel really good about it. I feel like I've been doing a lot of inner work and exploring a lot of different modalities of spirituality that have really helped me find a way forward. I'm curious, in terms of new paths, what are you hoping your path now leads to?
Do you mean like a spiritual path? Is that what you're talking about when you talk about paving a new path for yourself?
Yes, and maybe not. Maybe spiritual is not the right word for you. Meaningful, or
Yeah.
I don't want to put like boundaries on it or connotations that are going to
No,
like
that's good.
force an answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for me, that would look like building connection and community with people. And I think that's probably a missing piece. It's something Kelly and I talk a lot about. She's a real person of faith. She has her own complicated relationship with the church, as a woman, as someone who pursued ordination in the Anglican Church and really got shut down unfairly. And,
Yep.
all those, I don't fully understand all that would be like for a woman, but we often talk about like, what does it look like to build really significant connection and community with people? We're still really trying to figure that out. So I think the pathway for me is like doing meaningful work alongside other people that I love. And that starts with our partnership in our marriage, but then it's spilling out into the kinds of things that we're wanting to build together. So that adventure is definitely ongoing.
I love that. And that's beautiful. Connections and community. That feels like something you are uniquely gifted to do. And Josh, as you're talking, the thought that occurred to me is, and I regularly say this, for me, the most reliable marker of spiritual maturity is humility. When I see that, I don't question it. And when it's missing, red flags all over the place. And you're someone that I see it in spades. So,
that's really encouraging, Joel. Thank you.
Thank you for being here with us.
I really enjoyed it. Trent, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Josh. And the last thing is, how can people find out more about you? I know Clear and Loud, I think, is it clearandloud.com? And I believe you also have your own personal website. Maybe you could just give people quick pointers to how to find you.
Yeah, thanks for asking for that. Yeah, my website is just joshharris.com, and that's kind of just quick links to the stuff that I'm doing. The business is clearandloud.com. And then I spend time on Instagram. I'm posting content there, and my handle is just Harris Josh.
Great. Josh. Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much, Josh. I really, really enjoyed this, and I really appreciate you spending some of your evening with us. So it's been really fun.
It's a great conversation. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
All right, friends, we just had a fantastic time interviewing Joshua Harris. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Trent, You got to be a part of this conversation and pose the questions you want to ask. What were some of the takeaways that you took from this conversation?
Well, it was really fun talking with somebody who has been really influential that I've known about for a long time, and kind of getting to get backstage, get a backstage pass to his life, and see what he's been through, and how the book has had an impact on his life, and moving on from that was really fascinating. I think a big takeaway is here is a person that people can look to as an example of someone who's really trying to be authentic. You know, every life to me, Joel, is like it's like an experiment. And
Yeah.
everyone's sort of experimenting in a certain way. And I think his experiment in life is, what would life look like if I really made authenticity one of my core values? And that seems to be the path that he is following.
Mm-hmm.
Unpublishing these books. A lot of people, almost all people, would not do that.
Who does that? Yeah.
Who does that? And he may not say that this is what you need to do. It's just what he believed was right to do. And so that's fascinating. That's a
Mm-hmm.
character. That's an individual doing something really interesting. So that was remarkable. And I think another thing that was a big takeaway for me that I hope people will think about, that I think is really a great opportunity for a paradigm shift in our culture today, is the notion that acknowledging that you have been wrong is a sign of strength, not of weakness. It is
Mm-hmm.
possible to be confident and to be assertive and aggressive and bold. It's possible to do those, and it's possible to say, "Hey, everybody, I got it wrong." And who I am as a person, I'm the person who, I don't want to be right. I want to get it right, and that
Mm-hmm.
means that I want to pursue truth. And I think if more people did that, particularly public people in positions of power, but even in levels of friendship and family and these kinds of things, man, we would go a long way. And so I really appreciate his contribution in that area. So it was a fun. I think we covered some ground. We found some affinities and some of the experiences that we've had in the evangelical world, and things that have turned us off, and things that we have appreciated, that we still appreciate about the church. It was fun to share that, and I think a lot of people who listen to our podcast will find their own story somewhere embedded in what we talked about tonight. Joel, what stuck out to you? What moved you in the conversation?
First, just kind of a funny observation. I feel like he is probably the most Christian person we've had on our podcast, including ourselves.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
We haven't said the word Lord before. So I genuinely appreciated Joshua's kind of honesty, and he clearly is still, he said, I'm confused right now, and he's still working through some things and what he believes there, but it also it seems like he has a beautiful marriage where their faith is still kind of like a part of that, and he's just not sure where all that lands for him personally. And I deeply appreciate that authenticity, that honesty, because people want to hear like answers of this is where I'm at, define it. And he's like, I can't do that for you. Or maybe I won't do that for you. I'm going to share with you instead what's authentically where I'm at. And so I deeply appreciated that about Josh's stories. And, as we're kind of like listening to him share about his journey, I was like brought back to that subculture of evangelical Christianity, where I was constantly listening to podcasts, constantly reading books, constantly trying to attend the right conference and connect with the right people. And it's just what was so like what drove me to want to talk with Josh is this sense that I personally had this unresolved drive to become famous in the Christian world. I personally had that. I can name that. I can see what it did to me. I didn't pursue that in the same ways some of my peers did. But I definitely still wanted to do that. And I tried to write a book about the church that I pastored, and it's still sitting on my Google Drive with about 50,000 words in it. So, I mean, I remember trying to pursue those paths and being in the spotlight. And just talking with Josh and just realizing, man, it's just not all it's cracked up to be. And kind of some of his points about, the things he saw in the church world are also, the negatives and the hypocrisy. It's not necessarily a Christian thing. It's a human thing. That's what I hear him kind of saying. And I agree with that. People will point to Christianity and blame it for certain things. And listen, I do not try to defend the ills of church history or the harm that modern Christianity creates daily today. I'm not trying to defend any of that. I'm only trying to say that is not necessarily a product of Christianity. It is a product of ego, which shows up in all the religions. There's good religion and bad religion, which means to say that there are Christian communities and Christians who are doing amazingly beautiful things, but there's a lot in people who are not. And I think that's also true in other religions. It's true of irreligious groups that kind of pull together and have kind of like an identity. And what I appreciated about Josh and his journey is that he started with anger and the criticism, but then he began to see, as he got out of that bubble, it's like, oh, this is just a human condition kind of thing. And I went through a similar kind of experience. And to me, I still am very critical of a lot of the views and practices of American Christianity in particular. But I also can understand that is not necessarily because Christianity is wrong about it. To quote St. Augustine, you can't judge a philosophy by its abuse. And so it is helpful to kind of like hear him talk and go like, what do I think are still the redeemable aspects of this faith that I have 2 degrees studying that I would still want to hold on to? And he had talked about at the end there, connection and community. And I do think that the Christian faith does offer some really powerful perspectives around those 2 ideas.
Very much so. And I think that's the invitation to the ongoing cultural project is, can we find proxies for the structures that the church has had to generate these things that can replicate in some ways the benefits of gathering together and worshiping together and breaking bread together and these kinds of things. I don't know. It remains to be seen, but when you leave the church, you do find that some of those things are missing, and we have to get creative about producing community that's life-giving, but doing so in a way that's not super dogmatic and doctrinaire. I don't know how to do that. Hopefully that's something we continue to talk about, where we can find those spaces as human beings. So I don't know. I've had moments in recent weeks where I've driven by the local sort of UCC church or the Episcopalian church and be like, should I go on Sunday? Just in that sense of like, what am I missing by not being there? I know a lot of the things that I'm glad I miss out on, but it does make me wonder. So,
I hear that.
Yeah.
I've gone back a couple times here and there, and I'm like, I think I'm not into this anymore.
Well, the hard thing for me, Joel, is I would never be enticed back to a conservative evangelical church. I wouldn't. But then my problem with going to like a liberal mainline church, like a liberal United Methodist or something, is like, I still don't know if I can be at a place where these people do hold on to certain truths in the Bible and they get rid of other ones. I'm like, well,
yeah.
I don't know. I was just never able to find that landing place that some people are able to find, where they're able to say, listen, I don't hold on to inerrancy. I don't need that, but there are parts of Scripture that I definitely think are true. I wasn't able to find that compromise. The place that I have landed, at least tentatively, is I find that there's a lot of wonderful literature in the Bible. It's very life-giving and very powerful, whether or not it's true. And that's the way I engage with it. But even in a UCC church or a liberal Methodist church, liberal Episcopalian church, you're still going to have creeds, and you're still going to have doctrines that aren't really negotiable. So
Yep.
I'd have a hard time being there. But yeah, it was a really fun conversation, and appreciate him coming on and taking the time and being honest and candid with us, which is not easy to do. So
yeah, he showed up, and I wasn't sure. I'd seen so many times, he's on other podcasts. Usually they're Christian podcasts, so I'm sure there was a bit of a pressure to show up in a certain kind of way. And he just seems like such a nice guy, genuinely, like just like a Fred Rogers kind of like just cares about people kind of guy. But it was nice to hear him just kind of like talk about real life, and that was really that was a gift for me. I deeply appreciated it.
Big time. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. Please go out, check out Josh Harris's stuff, his website, and say hey to him and thank him for joining our podcast. Until next time.
Peace out.